And news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. I want to go back to what we began the show with, and this is the report that Jimmy Comer and the, I think he lets me call me Jimmy, and the House Oversight Committee issued yesterday as it pertains to their months-long probe of Biden's use of the autopen, or perhaps not Biden's use of the autopen, which is, I guess, the material point here. First of all, just the for those former Biden aides who did not invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, which were, is sort of a split decision. There were many who did, including his personal doctor. Interesting. But for those who did not, it included two former chiefs of staff, Jeff Zients and Ron Klain. Klain, who had been with Biden for a long time. And the question was about, what they saw. And it starts with this clip starts with Neera Tadden, snippets from the testimony. Jeff Zients then goes to Ron Klain, and it ends with Anita Dunn, longtime political flack for Biden and Obama as well. Pay particular attention to what Anita Dunn says.
Yes, I noticed that he was aging in terms of his physical condition. I noticed that, he shuffled more.
That he has more stumbling over words and gaffes than he did at the beginning of the term.
His rhetorical skills were not as strong as they had been, and his speeches were less effective, I thought.
We talked about age. We knew it was an issue, and we tried to design a strategy.
We had a discussion at the senior advisor level about whether the president should have a cognitive exam.
Well, I mean, that's the Anita Dunn saying we talked at the senior level, so inner circle, whether or not the president should have a cognitive exam. What does that tell you about what they were thinking? We're not sure if this guy's up for the job, right? What other logical inference can you make? So they knew, and they knew more than just sort of we saw signs of aging. Everybody ages, time stands still for no man and all that. And that's not what we're talking about, and everybody understands it. Talking about diminished capacity such that he's not up to the task of being president, which leads to the question of what was he authorizing and what wasn't he, and what capacity did he have to authorize anything? As it pertains to the autopen specifically, the best part of this snippet of clips is when the inquisitors are talking to former Chief of Staff Jeff Zients. And they ask him about this memo, which is signed Jay-Z and ostensibly came from him. But he says he doesn't remember writing that memo. And the whole point of this compilation is that nobody knew anything about anybody using the autopen except for Joe Biden, although there was no process to document that this decision to sign this executive order to grant this pardon or act of clemency, there was no process or documentation associated with memorializing that this decision comes from the president, and so it shall be executed. The autopen was just running around signing documents by itself.
They stole the presidency of the United States.
Do you know who the people who were actually operated the autopen were?
I do not.
Do you know any of the actual staff who were using the autopen?
No.
You don't know their names?
No.
Have you never seen a decision memo laying out the breakdown of when the president should hand sign a particular set of documents?
Not prior to prep.
Did he hand sign all executive orders?
He did not. He hand-signed many executive orders. But he did not hand sign all executive orders.
Can you read your response?
I approve the use of the autopen for the execution of all the following pardons. Thanks, Jay-Z.
Did you yourself write this email?
I do not believe I did.
That autopen was used excessively, and yet no one can say for certain that Joe Biden was given the orders to use the autopen.
Somebody's impersonating Jeff Zients on White House communications. Obviously, that was Comer's commentary at the end. For more on this and other legal matters, please be joined by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney and contributing editor at National Review, also the author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Dan, it's my pleasure.
So what do you make of the autopen matter and the fact that no one knows who other than the president used the autopen, and no one can document that the president authorized certain things? At least that's what Comer wants the Department of Justice to investigate. I mean, if you can't document it and you can't get to the bottom of who signed the document, except to the extent you know it wasn't Biden, then what is the exposure many of those grants of clemency and commutation and outright pardons, I should say, pardon and commutation, in addition to any executive orders that are still in effect? I can't imagine there are many at this point in Trump's administration, but what is the legal standing of those orders?
I think they're binding. I think this is a tremendous scandal. So I don't want to be understood as poo-pooing it, because it's not. It's a major scandal, and people who are complicit in it, starting with Biden, obviously need to be held accountable, at least politically accountable. I don't know what you can do with them legally, but the president's competence, the president's ability to run the government is not a objective fact. It's a constitutional fact.
Right.
And what I mean by that is the Constitution provides two ways to take away the president's power. One is the impeachment power of Congress, and the other is the 25th Amendment. And if those don't get invoked, then what imbues the president with power is the fact that he's been elected, not his mental state of being. And even though in the era of progressive government, which has gone back a century, we now have all these different processes before a president makes a decision. You know, there's a pardon attorney at the Justice Department, and there's an OLC review and other reviews of any executive orders and all that stuff. All that stuff is norms that have grown up in the progressive era. The fact is the president doesn't have to have any power at all. And the only thing that needs to document an official action of the president is, the bottom line document, which in this case would be a pardon or an executive order. No one is saying that those can't be signed by the autopen. So even though I think this is scandalous, I don't know legally what you do about it, because, all those people, Dan, that you played clips from, they're all appointed aides of the president. The people who had responsibility to act here would have been like Kamala Harris and the members of the cabinet, the Senate confirmed cabinet, who could have invoked the 25th Amendment and didn't.
Right, but there's two things. So one is, does he have the capacity? And I take your point that, basically under the Constitution, he has the capacity until someone declares that he doesn't and follows the process to remove him from office for having lack of capacity. So, it's the failure to do that gets him off. That gets him off the hook for the mens rea question. But the execution of it, the point is to say if he didn't authorize a pardon for Joe Schmo, and I'm just suggesting this as a hypothetical, and Jeff Zients, the chief of staff, said, well, I think he would want us to pardon Joe Schmo, and so I'm going to sign the pardon for Joe Schmo. I mean, how could that stand? Then that's a staffer usurping the authority of the elected official.
Well, but you didn't complete the equation, right? Biden is still there. If his staff went crazy and pardoned someone who he hadn't pardoned, he still gets to countermand that if it wasn't what he wanted. If he didn't do anything about it, we have to assume that Biden was fine with it. Unless he's removed under the 25th Amendment, right? I mean, otherwise, let's change the facts a little bit. Suppose, like, Trump is in South Korea today, and he wants something done. So he calls, the White House. He can't get his chief of staff or whatever, or maybe his chief of staff is with him, and he tells somebody at the White House, I want this signed. Not like the regular way of doing things. It's completely out of the norm and everything else. But if the president is directing somebody, he's got the authority to delegate, and he says, I want this signed. Do it that way. It's completely out of the ordinary, but nobody would say it wasn't something Trump was authorized to do.
Well, right, but I mean, if he called Stephen Miller and said, sign this, and Stephen Miller signed it, then when Stephen Miller is asked later, he'd say, yeah, the president called me and I signed it. Instead, but that's not what we have here. We have nobody knows who signed it, and the suspicion is it wasn't Joe Biden, but nobody's taking ownership of it. So it suggests there was no direction, and somebody took it upon themselves. There's nobody providing a completion to that analogy you're making, that somebody was told to do this and so I did it.
Yeah, I hear you, but what I'm saying is, as a matter of law, we're now not talking about objective reality, right? I agree with you. The objective reality is Biden was out of touch and his staff was going wild, and we have no way of knowing how much he actually approved and how much he didn't. But as a matter of constitutional law, in terms of, like, could you get this pardon reversed in court, or could you get this executive order nullified, I think the state of play is Biden is president for 4 years unless he's removed or his powers are taken away under the Constitution. And as long as he didn't countermand something his staff did, the presumption in the courts would be that he approved it, even if it was done in an abnormal way, because the president isn't required to follow any of these procedures. You remember, like, the Clinton pardons in 2000, one of the scandalous aspects of the pardon, for example, of Mark Rich, was that Clinton didn't go through the Justice Department's pardon process. He only met with, like, representatives of Rich, who, by the way, were, pouring money into the Democratic and Clinton various interest coffers, right? Totally corrupt, totally irregular. But I don't think anybody could have gone into court and said, let's cancel Mark Rich's pardon, because it was, Clinton was president. He was allowed to authorize it. There was an approvable bribery case, and therefore, even though it stunk to high heaven, you couldn't reverse it. That's, part of the reason, Dan, I think that we're so upset about stuff like this is the president has a lot of power and the presidency has a lot of power. And when they do stuff like this, it's not reversible. Yeah.
Well, I mean, let me play out another couple of hypotheticals, see if there's any way in, if there was more information that became available. Like, as I mentioned, Dr. O'Connor, his personal doctor, took the fifth. What if the Department of Justice, per a grant of immunity, gives, although I don't know exactly what he would need immunity from, but gives O'Connor a grant of immunity. He says, okay, so tell us what you really think and tell us what you communicated. And he says, I really think he didn't have the ability to continue doing the job, and I told him that, and everybody ignored me. So now you have sort of a medical opinion that there was a lack of capacity, and maybe that points to challenging some of these other witnesses, including those that took the fifth, doing the same thing to try to get to the truth. And ultimately we find out who actually used the autopen, and it's stipulated that they did so without Biden's knowledge. Even in that scenario, you're saying because Biden didn't countermand it and he didn't and he wasn't removed under the 25th Amendment, the court's position would probably be to default to say, well, he still had a chance to countermand it and he didn't, so therefore it stands.
Yeah, well, I think we have precedent for this, right? I mean, if you look at the last year plus of Woodrow Wilson's administration, he was completely incapacitated. I mean, he had a series of strokes. essentially his wife was signing everything. There's a small cabal of people who knew what was going on, but they didn't let it become publicly known that he was completely incapacitated. And everybody thought, and to this day, I think thinks that was scandalous. But legally, his powers had not been removed from him, and I don't know that there's a legal vehicle. I don't think there is a legal vehicle for invalidating something under circumstances where the legal processes for taking the president's powers away were not invoked.
Would this be,
I don't know what a court does about that.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, when this first started, before Biden exited stage left, we talked about, White House counsel under Bush, under W, gave an opinion about using the autopen, and W decided not to use it, but he said basically you could use it so long as you're authorizing it or designating someone to do it on your behalf, to authorize something you want done. But I mean, it doesn't seem like there is. I mean, there's precedent, like you said, Woodrow Wilson, in terms of similar actions being taken. But is this something that's worth litigating to the highest court to try to get more clarity in sort of exigent circumstances like these, which, as you point out, have happened more than once?
I don't think it'd be worth litigating, like whether a pardon was valid or not. I do think it would be worth exploring, even though I'm not optimistic about the outcome of this, but I think it would be worth exploring whether there are criminal charges to be brought against people in the White House for fraud, for some version of fraud on the government. I can't think of a statute that nails this on the head, and I hate the idea that I'm like seemingly recommending something that I kind of criticize Jack Smith for, which is taking these statutes that don't really apply to the situation and trying to stretch them to cover things because people were outraged and they felt like something needed to be done. But I think, Dan, that it would be more worthwhile to do a criminal investigation of the people who exercise powers potentially fraudulently, with the understanding that this is an uphill case because in the end, Biden's going to say, I authorized everything.
Right.
So I don't know how you get around that. It would be one thing if Biden really was Woodrow Wilson, like if Biden was not in a position to come out and say, I authorized everything because he was so incapacitated that he couldn't do that. But we don't have that situation, right? He served for the full 4 years. He was present and accounted for when Trump got inaugurated. He still seemed, at least ostensibly, to be functioning as president. And when interviewed about all these things and asked about it, he says he authorized everything. I don't know how you get around that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point in terms of Biden's substantiate. That's the substantiation, and that's all the substantiation you need because he's the president. Okay, Andy McCarthy, former chief assistant U.S. attorney, contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
And Andy, join us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on